Imagine this. A black man's family lake cabin is demolished by a corrupt HOA claiming he didn't pay fees. But what the HOA didn't know, his entire family are federal agents, and when they strike back, the HOA president ends up in handcuffs. Wait till you hear how they exposed him. Hit subscribe and stick around, because this twist will leave you speechless. Marcus Johnson had always loved his late father's cabin. Nestled on the quiet banks of Willow Lake, the small wooden structure was more than just property. It was family history. His father had built it with his own hands, and every nail, every creak of the floorboards carried memories of summers filled with laughter, fishing trips, and warm evenings around a fire. When Marcus inherited the cabin, he knew it wasn't just a house, it was a legacy he was determined to protect. That's why, when the Homeowners Association, HOA, started sending him aggressive letters demanding unpaid fees, Marcus was confused. He had never agreed to join their association, nor had his father. The cabin stood on private land, passed down for generations, and it had never been part of the HOA's jurisdiction. Still, the letters kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. Failure to comply will result in legal action, the last envelope read, stamped with bold red ink. Marcus shook his head and placed it on the kitchen counter. Scare tactics, he muttered, knowing full well he owed them nothing. But the HOA wasn't bluffing. Behind closed doors, a handful of board members saw Marcus not as a neighbor, but as a target. They despised that a black man owned prime lakefront property that many of them envied. To them, the claim of unpaid fees was just a convenient excuse. One morning, Marcus returned from town with groceries only to find heavy machinery rumbling down the dirt road. His heart sank as he saw men in hard hats and bulldozers parked outside his cabin. The HOA had made their move. Marcus froze in his tracks as the sound of engines roared through the morning air. Dust clouds rose as the demolition crew surrounded his family's cabin. The wooden porch where he once sat with his father was now covered with caution tape. A bulldozer's metal claw hovered like a predator, ready to strike. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Marcus shouted, dropping the grocery bags and sprinting forward. His voice cracked with anger and disbelief. A man in a neon vest turned, clipboard in hand. "Orders from the HOA, sir. Properties being cleared due to unpaid fees and violations." Marcus' fists tightened. "Unpaid fees? I don't owe you a dime. This cabin has never been part of your HOA. The man shrugged, clearly uninterested in Marcus's protest. "Take it up with the board. We're just following instructions." He waved at the bulldozer operator, who revved the machine. The sound of wood splintering filled the air as the first wall caved in. Marcus's heart sank. Memories flashed before him, his father teaching him to fish, his mother humming on the porch swing, childhood summers filled with laughter. With every crash of timber, it felt like his family's history was being erased. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some whispering, others smirking. The sight of Marcus standing powerless in front of his own property was exactly what certain HOA members wanted. They believed no one would challenge their authority. But they were wrong. Marcus wasn't alone. His family, brothers, cousins, and uncles were not just ordinary men and women. They were federal agents with connections far deeper than the HOA could imagine. Marcus clenched his jaw, watching his cabin collapse into rubble. "They think they can destroy my family's legacy?" he whispered to himself. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." The next evening, Marcus stormed into the community center where the HOA board was holding its weekly meeting. His clothes still smelled of smoke and sawdust from the demolished cabin, his eyes burning with fury. Inside, a handful of board members sat comfortably around a long table. At the center was Richard Hayes, the smug president of the HOA, a man in his late 50s with silver hair slicked back and a permanent smirk etched across his face. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson," Richard said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "I assume you're here about the cabin." Marcus slammed a folder of property deeds and legal documents onto the table. "You had no right. That land has been in my family for generations. My father built that cabin long before this HOA even existed. You trespassed. You destroyed private property." Richard barely glanced at the papers. "The HOA has the authority to enforce rules. You ignored multiple notices. We acted within our rights. Your rights." Marcus snapped, his voice echoing in the hall. You fabricated fees. You targeted me because you think I don't belong here. This wasn't about rules, it was about racism and greed. A murmur spread among the few residents in the room. Some shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Richard folded his arms. File a lawsuit if you want, Mr. Johnson. But I'll tell you this, our lawyers are ready. And in the meantime, your cabin is gone. Marcus stared at him, chest rising and falling with anger. For a moment he thought about throwing a punch, but then a cold, determined calm settled over him. You're going to regret this, Marcus said quietly. You have no idea who my family is. Marcus sat alone in his truck after leaving the HOA meeting, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The anger boiling inside him was more than personal, it was generational. His father had always warned him that some people would never see him as deserving of the land he inherited. Tonight, Marcus finally understood. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His younger sister, Vanessa Johnson, was the first person he called. She answered almost immediately. Marcus, you sound upset. What's going on? They demolished it, Vanessa. The HOA sent a crew and tore down Dad's cabin. It's all gone. There was silence on the other end, followed by the sharp intake of breath. What? That was private property. They did, Marcus cut in. And Richard Hayes is behind it. He thinks I'll just roll over and let it happen. Vanessa's voice hardened. He doesn't know who we are. Exactly, Marcus replied. I need you and the others here. We're not just going to fight this, we're going to expose them. Within an hour, Vanessa had called their cousins David and Elijah, both federal investigators with years of experience in corruption cases. Their uncle Thomas, a retired FBI agent, was also looped in. The Johnson family wasn't just close-knit, they were a force, bound by loyalty and a shared commitment to justice. As Marcus ended the last call, he looked back at the lake where the cabin once stood. The ground was still littered with broken beams and shattered glass, but his grief had transformed into resolve. The HOA thought they'd crushed him. But in truth, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a family with federal authority and nothing left to lose. The following Saturday, Marcus stood in the driveway of his mother's house as familiar cars began pulling in, one after another. First was Vanessa, sharp as ever in a tailored blazer even on her day off. She hugged Marcus tightly, her voice low but firm. We'll get justice for Dad's cabin. Next came David, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a briefcase that looked like it weighed more than a toolbox. I brought everything I need to dig into the HOA's financials, he said with a grim smile. Elijah arrived soon after, sunglasses still on from the drive, exuding quiet confidence. If these people are hiding something, I'll find it. Nobody's above federal law. Finally, Uncle Thomas stepped out of his truck, his presence commanding despite his age. Years in the FBI had carved steel into his voice. When I heard what they did, I knew I couldn't just sit at home. Richard Hayes and his cronies are about to find out what accountability looks like. Marcus felt the weight of his grief ease slightly. With his family around him, he wasn't just a man who lost a cabin. He was part of a powerful unit with skills, connections, and authority that the HOA couldn't even imagine. They gathered around the dining room table where Marcus laid out the evidence, the fraudulent letters, the demolition order, the property deed. Vanessa flipped through the documents quickly. They forged authority they never had. That's criminal. David opened his laptop. Give me 2 days. I'll track their money trail. If they've been targeting you, they've probably targeted others too. Uncle Thomas leaned forward, eyes sharp. We're not just going after them for Marcus. We're going to dismantle the whole rotten system. The Johnson family had declared war. David sat in front of his laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses as he typed furiously. His background in federal investigations had taught him that when people abuse power, they usually leave a money trail. And HOAs, no matter how small, were notorious for mismanaging funds. All right, he muttered, scrolling through a series of public records. Let's see what you've been hiding, Richard Hayes. Marcus and Elijah hovered nearby, anxious but curious. Anything yet? Marcus asked. Plenty, David replied, his voice steady. Their financial reports are sloppy, intentionally sloppy, payments that don't add up, fees charged to homeowners that disappear into thin air. And look at this. Richard approved a $50,000 landscaping project that never actually happened. No invoices, no contractors listed. Elijah leaned in. That's embezzlement, classic HOA scam. Vanessa, who had been making phone calls, joined them at the table. And it gets worse. I spoke to 3 other homeowners who said they were bullied into paying bogus violation fines. One elderly couple even lost their dock because they couldn't keep up with fees that weren't real. Marcus clenched his fists. So they've been targeting others too, not just me. Uncle Thomas, listening from the corner, finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of years spent hunting down criminals. This isn't just greed, it's organized fraud. If they tore down your cabin under false pretenses, they've crossed a line that goes beyond civil disputes. That's federal, David smirked, tapping his keyboard. And lucky for us, we have the tools to bring it all into the light. By the time we're done, Richard Hayes won't just lose his HOA presidency, he'll be facing prison time. The Johnson family had their first crack in the armor. The very next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside his house. Peeking through the blinds, he saw 2 SUVs idling at the curb. 3 men in dark suits stepped out, not federal agents, but HOA enforcers, thugs dressed to look official. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, strode up the porch and banged on the door. Bang, bang, bang. Marcus opened it, standing his ground. What do you want? The man smirked. Mr. Johnson, the board doesn't appreciate you making waves. You should drop this little crusade of yours before it gets complicated. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Complicated for who? Because I don't scare easy. The man leaned closer, his breath hot with menace. Property disputes can drag on forever. Lawyers are expensive. People get tired. Sometimes they even lose more than just their houses. Before Marcus could respond, Elijah appeared behind him, badge flashing on his. You just threatened a federal officer, Elijah said coldly. Care to repeat yourself? The man's smirk faltered, but he covered it with a scoff. We're just here to deliver a message. Message received, Elijah shot back. Now get off this property before I put you in cuffs. The men retreated quickly, muttering under their breath as they got back into the SUVs and sped away. Vanessa, who had been listening from the hallway, crossed her arms. They're scared. That's why they're trying to intimidate us. But they just made their biggest mistake. They showed us they have something to hide. Marcus exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, it was desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. Uncle Thomas' words echoed in his mind. This is bigger than a cabin. This is war. 2 days later, Vanessa walked confidently into the county courthouse, a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. As a federal prosecutor, she had navigated hundreds of hearings, but this one carried more weight. It was personal. She filed a petition for an injunction against the HOA, demanding an immediate halt to any further property actions. Inside her folder were copies of forged notices, demolition orders with no legal basis, and sworn statements from other homeowners who had been bullied. Meanwhile, David worked tirelessly on the digital front. He had traced several HOA transactions to an offshore account under Richard Hayes's name. Each document he unearthed was another nail in the coffin. This isn't just sloppy bookkeeping, David said, eyes fixed on his laptop screen. This is laundering. Hayes is pocketing thousands. Elijah, on the other hand, was gathering testimonies. He knocked on doors, recording conversations with residents who admitted they had been extorted but were too afraid to speak up. One woman, nearly in tears, confessed, "They told us if we didn't pay, they'd tear down our shed. We couldn't afford to fight." By the end of the week, the Johnsons had assembled a mountain of evidence. Uncle Thomas spread the documents across Marcus's dining table like pieces of a puzzle. This isn't about one family anymore. Richard Hayes has turned this HOA into his personal bank account. And when we expose him, he won't just lose his title, he'll be facing federal charges. Marcus looked at the pile of evidence, then at his family. The cabin was gone, but something bigger was taking shape. The Johnsons weren't just fighting for their land, they were about to topple a corrupt empire. The first strike had been made. The HOA didn't even know what was coming. The HOA board gathered nervously in their meeting room, tension thick in the air. Richard Hayes sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly combed, though sweat glistened at his temples. "Why are we even discussing this?" he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Johnson is one man. He doesn't have the resources to fight us." But board member Carol Whitman shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Richard, it's not just him anymore. Word is spreading. Neighbors are whispering about fraud, about intimidation. And didn't you hear? His family's connected to federal law enforcement." Richard scoffed, though his jaw tightened. "Rumors, nothing more." Another member, Stephen, leaned forward. "Rumors don't scare people like those SUVs backing out of his driveway did. My wife said she saw one of his relatives flash a badge. If the feds get involved..." Richard cut him off. "I've handled tougher situations. The Johnsons are bluffing. They want us to fold, but we won't." Carol met his gaze, her voice trembling. "And if they're not bluffing?" "You forged documents, Richard. You funneled money into your own accounts. If they uncover that, we're all going down with you." Richard's eyes narrowed, his arrogance slipping just enough to reveal fear. He leaned back, forcing a smirk. "No one will touch us. The Johnsons don't have proof," but deep down he knew he was lying to himself. The Johnsons had already started digging, and cracks were forming in the board's loyalty. By one, his allies were questioning him. And when fear starts spreading, betrayal is never far behind. Richard Hayes told himself he was still in control, but for the first time, he wasn't sure he believed it. Marcus stood on the steps of the community center, a stack of flyers in his hand. He and Elijah had spent the entire evening printing them, documents exposing the HOA's corruption in plain language for every neighbor to see. Bold letters across the top read, "Where are your fees really going?" By one, curious residents approached. Marcus handed out the papers, his voice steady but passionate. "This isn't just about me. They destroyed my family's cabin, yes. But look at these numbers. Your fees, your fines. They've been lining Richard Hayes' pockets." Whispers spread like wildfire. A man named Mr. Collins, who had quietly paid thousands over the years, frowned as he read. "So that landscaping project, it never happened?" Vanessa stepped forward, her prosecutor's voice carrying authority. "Not a dime went to landscaping, or maintenance, or security. Every signature Richard used was fraudulent. We have the proof." A woman clutching her flyer gasped. "We thought we were alone. They threatened to take our dock last year if we didn't pay." "You're not alone," Marcus assured her. "That's why we're here, to fight back." As the crowd grew, more residents joined in, some angry, some frightened, all realizing they'd been duped. For years they had paid into a system that never served them, only exploited them. David stepped onto the steps beside Marcus, laptop in hand. He connected it to a portable projector and displayed bank records for everyone to see. Gasps rippled through the group as Richard's name appeared tied to offshore transfers. "This is theft," David declared. "And if we stand together, we can take them down." For the first time, Marcus saw not fear but fire in his neighbor's eyes. The community was waking up, and Richard Hayes' empire was crumbling. The next HOA meeting was unlike any before. The room was packed, every chair filled, with residents standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls. The air buzzed with tension, the whispers of betrayal and anger swirling like a storm. At the front of the room sat Richard Hayes, visibly rattled but trying to keep his composure. He tapped his gavel. "Order. This is a private board meeting. Only members are allowed. We are the members," a voice shouted from the back. Applause erupted, cutting him off. Marcus rose from his seat, holding a folder thick with evidence. His voice carried through the room, calm but firm. "For years, Richard Hayes and his board have exploited us. They've stolen our money, fabricated fees and bullied us into silence. But that ends tonight." He laid the documents on the table for everyone to see. Bank records, fake invoices, testimonies. The crowd pressed forward, gasps and angry mutters filling the hall. Richard's face turned pale. "This is slander. None of this proves." Vanessa stood, flashing her badge. "It's not slander, Mr. Hayes. It's federal evidence, and I assure you prosecutors take forgery, fraud, and embezzlement very seriously." The room erupted again, this time with cheers. Several board members exchanged panicked looks. Carol Whitman, who had grown increasingly uneasy with Richard's schemes, finally spoke. "I won't go down with you, Richard. I resign, and I'll testify against you if I must." That was the breaking point. Others followed, distancing themselves from Richard as the crowd turned hostile. Shouts of "thief!" and "resign" filled. The room Richard gripped the table, his mask of arrogance shattered. For the first time, he realized he had lost control. And the Johnsons weren't finished yet. 2 weeks later, Richard Hayes sat in a courtroom, his once confident demeanor replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. His expensive suit did little to hide the sweat dripping down his forehead as the judge read the charges: fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and conspiracy. In the gallery, Marcus sat with his family, their presence unshakable. Vanessa stood at the prosecution table, her voice steady as she outlined the case. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about abuse of power, destroying lives, homes, and trust. The defendant believed no one could stop him. He was wrong. One by one, neighbors took the stand. Elderly couples who had been bullied into paying fake fines. Young families threatened with foreclosure. Their stories painted a picture of cruelty and greed that no jury could ignore. David's financial records sealed the deal, tracing every dollar Richard had siphoned. Elijah's testimony added weight, showing the intimidation tactics used to silence dissent. Uncle Thomas, though retired, spoke with the authority of decades in the FBI. "I've seen organized crime rings operate cleaner than this HOA," he told the court. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Gasps and cheers filled the courtroom. Richard slumped in his chair, his empire reduced to nothing but rubble, just like the cabin he had ordered destroyed. Outside, Marcus stood by the lake, looking at the empty spot where his father's cabin once stood. His heart still ached at the loss, but he knew something greater had been built in its place. Dad would be proud, Vanessa said softly, standing beside him. Marcus nodded, watching the sun reflect on the water. They tried to take everything from us. Instead, we took everything from them. Justice had been served.